Trying to understand dietary advice in the modern day can feel like navigating a maze. For example, on a given day, a source can tell you that nuts are a superfood. On another day, a different source may tell you that nuts are dangerous and should be avoided. You can find contrary headlines for basically any food out there, but obviously both positions can be right at the same time. So why does this happen? It happens because the vast majority of nutritional studies have major flaws and hence cannot be trusted. In this video, I'm going to break down 4 reasons why most nutrition science is junk, and I'm also going to give you tips to understand which scientific studies you can actually trust. Let's get into it. The first reason why most nutritional science cannot be trusted is because most of it is based on something that's called epidemiology. Epidemiology is basically just making decisions and doing science based off correlations, something that you see, a relationship between two different objects or behaviors. A simple example to understand epidemiology and correlations in nutritional studies could be comparing fruit consumption with heart disease rates. Anything I'm going to say right here is not an actual study, it's just me giving an example to get the point across. So let's say you do a study where you look at two groups of people, one who eats a lot of fruits and another who eats very little fruits, right? And you're comparing that against heart disease. You might find in an epidemiological study that the group that eats less fruit has a higher rate of heart disease, whereas on the contrary, a group that eats a higher amount of fruits has a lower rate of heart disease. This is what we call an inverse correlation. Much of nutritional science is actually done based on this kind of methodology, but these methodologies have a huge flaw mainly in the fact that you've probably heard this being said many times, but correlation can never inform on causation. The reason that correlations cannot inform on causation is because they cannot control for confounding variables. A confounding variable is basically any third or fourth or whatever fifth action that could be going on in the background that we're not accounting for, but could be causing this difference. So in our fruit example, it could be that the group of people who eat more fruits and have lower heart disease, maybe they also exercise more. On the contrary, I can give another example of a correlation which will show this very well. So there is a correlation between ice cream consumed on a hot day and heat strokes. So would it be intuitive or smart to conclude that eating a lot of ice cream is what causes heat stroke? No, obviously not. We all know that there's some kind of third factor, there's some kind of confounding variable there that's causing the heat stroke, which is that it's a sunny day, it's a hot day. People tend to eat more ice cream on a hot day, and as a result, they also tend to have more heat stroke on hot days. Saying that ice cream is what's causing the heat strokes would be, frankly, stupid. And that's what a lot of nutritional science does. So that was reason number 1, epidemiological studies. Just looking at correlations, you're never actually isolating the variable. So if you take the example of the nuts which I gave in the intro, if any study comes to any of those two conclusions about nuts, whether that they're a superfood or that they're dangerous and should never be consumed, just based on a correlational study, it's basically junk science because there could have been a multitude of other factors that are causing either the positive benefit you see or the detrimental effect you see. So basing any kind of nutritional science on epidemiology is just ill-advised, and it's junk science. The second reason that most nutritional studies are junk and cannot be trusted is because of something called healthy user bias. Healthy user bias is a phenomenon where one group in a study may be more health conscious overall than the other group of the study. One easy example of this is something I talked about at length in my ebook, and it pertains to fiber. There are a lot of studies that'll show that, groups that eat higher amounts of fiber have better health outcomes. And on the contrary, groups that eat lower amounts of fiber have worse health outcomes. But on the surface, this seems robust, but when you look into it, again, this healthy user bias infiltrates a little bit. You see, for the last 40 or 50 years, eating a high fiber diet has been seen as the healthy choice in the mainstream circles. The word has really gone around. So by very nature, the group that eats high levels of fiber is more likely to be more health conscious in general. They're more likely to work out more, sleep adequate amounts, avoid or consume less alcohol and other substances that aren't necessarily good for you. Just overall caring for their health. On the contrary, the group that eats lower fiber, they're more likely to be less health conscious. They probably do more of the opposite. They're less likely to work out, less likely to sleep as much, more likely to take harmful substances and stuff like that. So this healthy user bias brings in all these other healthy confounding variables that could be causing the difference in the groups. It could be that fiber itself does nothing. Maybe it's benign, maybe it's worse, maybe it is better. But we can't actually tell because between these two groups, there's a severe healthy user bias where there's just so many other activities that these two groups of people are doing wrong, are doing differently, that when we observe them, we can't in any good or honest faith say that yes, we are only talking and isolating fiber on its own. We're not, because there are so many confounding variables, and this is again one of the biggest limitations of epidemiology, and a healthy user bias really mars most nutritional studies, and again is why a lot of them cannot be trusted. The third reason why most nutritional studies cannot be trusted is just because of participant error, or even just error in the study overall, which could come from the researchers themselves. But specifically on the topic of participant error, I'm going to talk about something that happens frequently in epidemiological nutritional studies, which is food frequency questionnaires. So basically, instead of actually observing a group of people over, let's say, a month or 6 months or 3 months or a year, any kind of observation period, right? These researchers will simply just hand the participants a form, a questionnaire, asking roughly what they ate for a lot of the times. It's like the last year. Now, obviously, there is bound to be so much error here. Could you realistically even tell me what you ate in even somewhat precise quantities for the last week, last month, let alone the whole of the last year? I know I couldn't do any of those really, right? And again, for most people, it's the same. They can't just, off the top of their head, they can't recall exactly what they ate and what in which amounts. It's a very, firstly, memory-based thing, which we all know our memory can be flawed, and it's also subjective to an extent, right? Not everybody has a scale in their mind where they can be like, oh yeah, I had 50 grams of this that day. So one person's 50 grams could be another person's 100 grams, right? There's just no consistency, and this kind of food frequency questionnaire methodology of doing these studies and trying to understand what people are eating just brings in so much error that I feel like you're better off just not doing the study, basically. The last point, again, it's something that I talk about extensively in my ebook, is misleading classifications. In a lot of these studies, again, because of these food frequency questionnaires, they ask you, okay, how much of X food product did you eat? Okay, how much of Y food product did you eat? But in theory, it sounds okay, fine. You ask them how much meat they ate, for example. You ask them how many grains or how much dairy they ate, for example. But in practice, it's a lot more complicated than that, because most people do not just eat one food group at one time. Most of our meals, for most people in the world, is a mixture of different food groups, right? So take a pizza, for example, right? A pizza where, let's say, you put some veggies on it as toppings and you put some like red meat on it as a topping, okay? Now, what exactly should that food be classified as? Well, the base, like the bread of the pizza, well, that's grains right there, okay? Then you put cheese on the pizza, okay, that's dairy. Then you have some veggies and maybe some fruits as toppings, okay, you have fruits and veggies. And then you have red meat as your, or just meat, let's just say, as your fourth topping, right? So, well, again, we have kind of all four food groups. So what do we call this? What do we classify a pizza as in a study? Well, in practice, most of these studies will classify a pizza as red meat, even though there is bread, there is dairy through the cheese, and there are veggies, but somehow it's classified only as red meat. I don't think anybody can argue in good faith that observing pizza is the same as observing red meat as a whole. But that's exactly what these studies do. They use these misleading classifications to malign, a lot of the times, red meat, right? So observing pizza and burgers and lasagna, other kinds of mixed foods like that, they'll be classified as red meat. And then when you observe outcomes that are bad, then the headline will say that, oh, red meat causes XYZ detrimental health outcome. But again, it's like, what about all of the other stuff that we were counting as red meat? What about the grains? What about the veggies, for example? Like, what about all of those other things, right? It's just misleading. You're not getting the full picture. Just because these mixed foods like pizza or lasagna or whatever may contain red meat, they're classified as red meat as a whole. But again, that is just misleading and honestly just almost blatant deception. I use this example in my ebook. Imagine if I was to study apples, right? Do a study on apples and their health outcomes, but I'm also including apple pies in my study, in my methodology, because, oh, well, apple pies include apples. Well, I mean, Yes, they do, but I'm not really studying apples anymore, am I, right? Because there's so much, there's wheat and grains in an apple pie. There's so much sugar in an apple pie. If I wanna, in good faith, talk about the health effects of apples, I should be isolating apples alone, not throwing them in apple pies and then saying to you that, oh, look, see, apples are bad for you. It's completely illogical, and again shows why much of nutritional science is junk and cannot be trusted. So these were the four main reasons why nutritional studies cannot be trusted very well in this modern day and age. They just have far too many methodological errors and biases in them that are clouding the actual the truth, really. That's why you get all of these, one day you can get, for example, it could be milk. One day milk is amazing for you, and the other day milk is terrible for you and should be avoided. It's all because of this junk science. But luckily for us, there is a way to decipher this kind of junk science from the science that we can actually trust and is actually robust, and I'll get into that right now. So the studies we can actually put some more faith into that are better done and can actually give any kind of useful information are what's called randomized control trials. These are always thought of as they're considered the gold science of research, not only nutritional research, any kind of research, right? So what is a randomized control trial? Well, it's an actual experiment, not just, I took two groups of people and I asked them some questions and then I looked at their outcomes based on that. No, it's an actual experiment. Here, you're going to, we're going to have one group of people do this for the next, let's say, 3 months, right? And then the other group of people is going to do the opposite thing for the same 3 months. And we're actually going to run an experiment and observe the differences we see between there. And the randomized part comes from the fact that the participants are blindly put into different groups. What this does is this basically mitigates the chances of any kind of healthy user bias, because whatever the aim is that whatever biases and differences there may be between people, because we are randomizing the groups, right? That those biases and differences will basically balance out, and that you have a kind of the aim is to have a perfectly random sample on both sides undergoing this experiment. The reason these are considered the gold standard of research and science is because they can actually inform on causation. Since you're running an experiment, you have a much tighter, not perfect, but much tighter, control on confounding variables, again, such as the healthy user bias and stuff like that. You are actually observing people doing what you told them to do. Randomized control trials are not perfect either, obviously. Nothing is perfect. Even in randomized control trials, there could be issues. There could still be biases that arise, or you could not have perfectly tight control over confounding variables, and they could still seep their way in. There can be differences between the groups still. But overall, just the fact that you are running an experiment and that you're actually at least trying to account for confounding variables already really increases their legitimacy like tenfold over epidemiological studies where you're not doing any of it. Epidemiology is some of the most laziest science that could ever exist. You could barely even call it science, to be honest. Again, it's just, okay, well, you say you did this, okay, other group says they did this, okay, now let's just see some outcomes. That is incredibly lazy science. And randomized control trials go away from that, really. They're at least an attempt to do legitimate, proper science. And because of that, randomized control trials are a lot more accurate than epidemiological studies could ever be. And that's why I only look to randomized control trials to make any kind of dietary or any other kind of changes in my life. If I see a study that is just epidemiological, or I hear about a study that's epidemiological, it's just correlation and observation based, I throw it out the window. There's absolutely no point. There's no value in believing or making decisions based on any of that. Again, all the errors I spoke of, it's not proper science. On the other hand, randomized control trials, while they may not be perfect, they're at least still 10 times better, in my opinion, at informing on any kind of legitimate cause and effect. So that is what I use, and that is what I recommend that you should use as well to base any kind of health decisions off of. Always look for randomized control trials where an actual experiment was done, and if you really want to go above and beyond, dig deeper. Look into the methodology of the study and, look for yourself. Were there any errors? Were there any kind of stupid oversights that could be confounding any kind of results in here? So if you want to go above and beyond, you should even look for the randomized control trials that are the cream of the crop in randomized control trials that are really striving to be that gold standard of scientific research. Anyways, that just about wraps it up. In this video, I went over 4 main reasons why most nutritional studies today are junk and cannot and should not be trusted. And I also went over what kind of science we should actually trust and tips to look out for those. If you found this video interesting, I'd suggest visiting the link in my description and considering my ebook. It goes into a lot more depth on this topic as well as many other topics pertaining to diet, weight training, and just your recovery and overall health. It's a 65,000 word guide really to help you build your dream physique and help you live a healthier life. I know the value in there is immense, and there's also a coupon code right now, first5, for the first person who buys the book. There's only one of them, but you can get it for just $5 if you use that coupon code. So if you're interested and this video helped you out, I would suggest that you act fast. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye.